You can even edit that service and it's going to show you the math. For example, taking that amount of materials, multiplying by that, and then taking that amount of hours multiplied by your labor hours, and it tells you your final price. It even can allow you to generate your member pricing if you want.
Welcome to Mastering ServiceTitan, where we get expert advice from power users. I'm your host, Josh Liu, and today I'm joined by Steve Cossette, the ServiceTitan expert and consultant at Titan Wizards, but aka everyone calls him the actual wizard. And Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, great to be here.
Yeah, very excited to have you back on the show. And before we get started, I wanted to know, how'd you get your nickname of being the wizard?
I'm the kind of person that when I see a problem, I dig into it and I go like really deep in finding it. So they call me a wizard because I'm able to make things work when most people, even sometimes ServiceTitan support themselves, say that they cannot. And I'm like, yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
Yeah, you would be like the highest level of expertise when it comes to support. So yeah, today's topic we wanted to dive into was how to generate your pricing and like make sure it's accurate and competitive for your equipment and services, and how to base that off all of your costs. So a lot of numbers, and we're pretty excited to go into this. And the first topic we'll dive into is dynamic pricing. I think this is one of the most underrated features for ServiceTitan Core. First question for you, Steve, is for those who don't know what dynamic pricing is, can you give a brief description of what it is?
Sure. Dynamic pricing is a feature in ServiceTitan for companies using flat rate mainly, that allows you to generate the prices of your tasks using the attached materials and labor. That's really the short and sweet description of it.
Gotcha. And then how exactly does it work, and what does setup look like?
I would say the first prerequisite would be to make sure that your services are attached to either materials or equipments, either or both, and also that you have hours on those services. You can also, if you want, use equipment as proverbial tasks. In other words, you can have a material attached to the equipment. The only thing to be careful of is that the cost of the actual equipment is not taken into account. So that's why I usually recommend just using a service as a starting point. And once that happens, ServiceTitan will be calculating based on what you configure in the dynamic pricing. For example, all the material costs, it will mark it up how you want it. It can be based on gross margin, it can be based on a multiplier, it can be based on percentage, however you like it. Generate your service price from there, which is going to be dynamic, meaning that as you update your material costs and all that stuff, or change the hours, the price is automatically going to update in real time.
Which is amazing. So that ensures that you have the margins that you want. It really protects that across all your services. Those prerequisites, when you talk to customers on ServiceTitan, would you say most people have those prerequisites set up, or is it like what percentage of people still have a lot of work to do in terms of the prerequisites?
That's a difficult question because from my standpoint, they come to us because they need help. In other words, they usually do not have it set up. So it's hard for me to give a fair number. I would say that's probably someone at ServiceTitan that can probably tell you from an analytics standpoint. But if I were to hazard a guess, I would be guessing probably about 25 to 30% at most.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense because they're coming to you needing help. What does that like prerequisite setup look like, and what can people expect in terms of like the workload to link all the materials, the sold hours, and update all your material pricing and stuff like that?
I would say the hardest point for most companies is usually to picture what each task would use in average material-wise. There's multiple ways of entering materials into services. You can do it from Excel, but I think ServiceTitan, the user interface on desktop, makes it easier for you to go inside a service. And if you go inside that service, at the top, you have multiple tabs, one of which is going to be materials. Another one is equipment. You're able to add equipment and materials there with a quantity. Once you have all of that and you have the category that the service resides in added to your dynamic pricing, then the price is automatically going to update.
Is there a way for, like, if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I know my price book is a mess and we definitely don't have this setup. Is there like a 80-20 approach to this where they can look at, hey, here's like my most common services first and start there? Or do they have to like fully do their whole, okay.
No, you can go, what I would recommend first is making sure that all the services are set right now as use static pricing. Because if not, as you enable the feature, it's just going to try to generate the prices for everything, and most of your services are going to come up as a $0 price. Not a good idea. So I would say for now, just turn them off. Turn all your services to be static price as a base. Set up your dynamic pricing with the right categories. This way, you'll be able to even preview what the dynamic price will be before you even turn it on and make it public. Once you have it set, that you have the right ones, you can just selectively for each of those services, turn the static pricing off. In other words, it's going to use dynamic pricing and do that slowly but surely. You don't need to do it all in or nothing.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay. So let me make sure I hear you correctly. So if you're saying you can first make sure everything is selected to use static pricing, basically what it is now. And then you can set up dynamic pricing in the back end where it has all the rules and the rates and the calculations. And then once you have that figured out, you can go back, maybe start checking off your most common services or a few at a time, and those will flip over to dynamic pricing one at a time.
Right.
Okay. And do you have any specific services that you would have people start with?
I would say the most common ones are going to be the installer ones. For example, AC furnace coils. Those are going to be the biggest outliers, or the install packages, which are usually going to be the side items around an install. Like, for example, the gases, the permitting fees, all the side stuff on an install. That's going to be your biggest outliers. And then work on the services that are not static. Like many companies, for example, have and I'm throwing a number out there, but let's say a $99 tune-up special or tune-up price. That those is probably going to be static. You still most likely want to have your materials added just for the sake of having your costs, just the sake of knowing your costs on a job and be able to know your margin. You might actually just have your $99 tune-up and noticing that if you add the cost that you're spending $105 on materials and you're like, oh, wow, I'm getting fleeced. Yeah, that's usually how people find out. But otherwise, I would say that's going to be your best way. Just like, try to add your material cost to as many of your tasks. Go by order of priority. Like what's more important first, then, jump to the next.
Okay, so get your material costs in there, get your sold hours in there, link everything, and then set everything to static. And then that's a great opportunity to then play with dynamic pricing and get that set up with it actually impacting what's showing on the price. So once they get to that stage of playing with dynamic pricing, I know there's like a few steps in that flow. Could you illustrate like what those steps are when you set up the dynamic pricing rules?
When you set up dynamic pricing rules, first you have to select categories, which is, by the way, priceable categories. Once you select those categories, and do keep in mind if you add more categories later, it does not automatically include them in those rules. So you have to go back in and make sure you add them. But once you added those categories, it's going to ask you to set up a markup, which you have, for example, percent markup. You have multiplier markup, like how many times. You have also like a gross profit, gross margin. You have multiple settings. There's a lot of things in there, like multiple variations. You can, even if you want, after the fact, once it's generated, round it up to the nearest dollar or the nearest $10 if you want. You can also add an after-hour fee. There's a lot of options. It's probably better for you to just go look at it. There's also a way to do a price leveling. In other words, you could have, for example, a task being level 1, which is the base price, level 2, that is an additional 10%, level 3, that is an additional 15%, and so on and so forth. That's all something you can build in your dynamic pricing.
Yeah, that customization is so helpful, so you don't have a bunch of duplicate items in your price book and like a weekend version and like all these multiple line items.
Oh, yeah.
So you got your categories, you got your markups, and then what comes after that?
Once you come after that, you just save the rule. Then after that, all those services that are inside those categories, if they're not set as use static pricing, are just going to start using that new price. Those that are set as static will use that static price, but in ServiceTitan, you'll be able to still preview what that dynamic price would be like. You can even edit that service and it's going to show you the math. It's quite literally going to show you, for example, taking that amount of materials, multiplying by that, and then taking that amount of hours, multiplied by how many hours, by the amount your labor hours, and it tells you your final price. It even can allow you to generate your member pricing if you want.
Very cool. And once you have dynamic pricing set up and you're starting to move it over from static to dynamic and people are starting to feel comfortable with it, What would you say is the most common reaction you get from clients that you work with?
They really love it because at that point, it's just a simple question of them updating their costs and then their price gets updated. They don't need to go mess up in spreadsheets and all that stuff to go generate their prices for each one of them and account for X, Y, and Z. And no, the math, you just enter your cost. That's it.
That's amazing, especially with fluctuating material costs. So you can basically, you're saying I can update the cost of one material and every single service that uses that material will dynamically update in real time.
Yep. All your technicians need to do is download the latest price book and that's it.
Yeah, that's amazing. What do you think are some of the other benefits to dynamic pricing? Like, why should people really put that work in?
I would say one of the greatest benefits of dynamic pricing is that you are kind of forced to add the materials to tasks. There's a lot of companies that just don't do that. They enter their cost and sometimes as a purchase orders, and even then that's not always. But I mean, it's just having your materials linked has a lot of benefits. A lot of companies don't know that, and it's very, very helpful.
How come a lot of companies don't do that?
I mean, that's from my experience. And again, that might be different from company to company, but either A, they're too busy to do it. B, they don't understand benefit. And I mean, you know what they say, you don't know until you have it. So that's very often the problem. And I'm going to make a comment more as general in ServiceTitan in general, but ServiceTitan has a lot of reporting, but all that reporting, all the money you're paying for is useless if you don't actually feed it that data, if you don't actually use it.
Yeah, so it'd be like impossible to get an accurate job costing or even close to accurate job costing if you don't have all that linked, right?
Right. It's like essentially by like the way you use ServiceTitan, I see some companies use it. It's like having a Ferrari in order for you to go to the grocery store once a week. It's
Exactly.
like, why?
Yeah. Yeah, and this feature I think really highlights the capabilities of how it can like dynamically, automatically ensure that you have the right price for the right job every single time without having to update stuff and like stuff dropping through the cracks and whatnot. Are there any like watch out for or like don't do this when it comes to setting up and using dynamic pricing?
The only thing I would say is some people might be worried about the prices updating automatically. That if, for example, they build an estimate for a customer, let's say that the estimate, the task generates to $5,000. They go update the material cost, and it's going to update the price in the price book, but the estimate itself, then by the way, that's also the same for the invoice, does not change. Those prices are going to be staying the original 5,000, even though the one in the price book now is 5,500. Now there is going to be a yellow icon by the price that allows you to update it if that's what you so wish, but by default it will not. Keep that in mind in case that does scare you. But yeah, there is no reason to be scared.
Is the reason it doesn't update, I'm just trying to think of the logic there. Is it because ServiceTitan is thinking you may have presented that price to the customer like 6 months ago and then the price has gone up, but you want to at least maintain that integrity of the first time and maybe they have a copy or something?
Correct. Yeah, you basically want to keep the integrity of your original presentation to the customer, so that if he comes back and calls you 2 days later saying, "Yeah, I'm interested in that estimate." Okay, so that estimate for $5,200, right? Wait, no, it was $5,000. Yeah, it's of course like many companies are going to have a thing that says, for example, your price on the estimate expires after 7 days or something like that. Then you would go in if they call back and regenerate the prices and give them an updated price. That's, again, all the power to you as a customer. You're able to do whatever you want with the platform.
Right. So every business can handle those situations how they want, but at least dynamic pricing will give you that little yellow icon to let you know, hey, just a heads up, this has changed since you presented it. So let's jump over to client-specific pricing. For customers who don't know what this is, can you give a brief description?
Essentially, client-specific pricing is what dynamic pricing is for people that use time and materials. Essentially, dynamic pricing is for flat rate, while client-specific pricing is for time and materials. Your dynamic pricing is generated on the task. It's generated before it's even added to anything. It's pre-baked, while customer-specific pricing is going to be, for example, generated when it is added to an invoice. And it will be based on a rule based on what customers. Like sometimes you might want customers from within zip code to have a specific pricing rule. That's how it works. It's customer specific instead of being task specific or category specific.
Gotcha. So for example, if you do some commercial work for a local Starbucks and you want to make sure you have a certain rate sheet that you've agreed to with Starbucks so that every time you choose that Starbucks customer, no matter what location, it'll apply that specific rate sheet for them
Correct.
on.
Yeah, you're able to filter it by a couple of different things. You're also able to exclude, like I've seen some companies that have an hybrid pricing method. Some of the business units are going to be generating using dynamic pricing. Some of them are going to be CSP, which is customer specific pricing. Especially with the newest update now, you're able to exclude specific price book categories. So for example, if you have 3 categories that are using dynamic pricing and 3 that are using customer specific, then you can say, for example, on your customer specific, those 3 dynamic pricing categories, you can just roll them out. And you're going to be able to segment your price book in the different ways that you're making your prices.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that was a new update. Can you give an example of like when or why a customer would want to do that hybrid?
That is very proper to each company. Like usually, like I said, some companies do commercial and residential. That is probably the most frequent situation, that they have residential that's going to be like a set of price book tasks that are going to be dynamic pricing, while your commercial is going to be CSP or flat, time and materials.
Perfect. That seems to be the case a lot of times where dynamic pricing is flat rate, it's residential services, and then we have client specific pricing for your commercial side.
Yeah. A thing to note too is that dynamic pricing very heavily relies on you adding materials to tasks. The way that it works for client-specific pricing is that it's mostly for, like I said, it's made for time and materials, meaning that it's going to be for chargeable materials, chargeable equipments, and stuff like that. You're able to also charge for services if you want, but the price of that service is going to be like just a static amount. In other words, it's going to be generated from the materials and the equipment themselves.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm listening to this and I want to set up or try or test client-specific pricing and see what it looks like. What can I expect the setup to be?
The basic requirements for CSP are lower than dynamic pricing, like I said, because you don't need to link anything to anything. But it's that you're going to need to make sure that your materials or equipments are properly costed, that you have accurate costs in there. Because if you have no cost, it cannot generate the price. You also have to make sure that you have some labor services, but if you're on time and materials, you already should have that. Once that's done, then all you got to do is get it turned on, get the filters set up, and just have fun.
Amazing. And I know both these features are part of ServiceTitan Core, and so you don't have to pay any extra fees or anything like that for them to be included. They should just be right under price book. When you go to set up client-specific pricing, is it kind of like steps, like a flow, kind of like dynamic pricing? Okay.
Yeah, it's a wizard. It's the same thing as dynamic pricing.
Gotcha. No wonder you like it so much. It's a wizard. So what? So what?
I see what you did there.
What are those steps in the flow for client-specific pricing?
It's very similar to dynamic pricing in a bit of a different way. The flow for customer-specific pricing is basically that it's going to ask you to set up a markup. It's going to ask you to set up, I don't know it 100% by heart because I don't really play with it a whole lot. But I know they're going to have like exceptions. Like you can specifically remove specific tasks. You can remove specific categories so that if you have both, you can remove some. You can also add, for example, so that it doesn't clash with another CSP role, you can add that as an exception. But otherwise, it's very similar in a way to what dynamic pricing does. It just does things differently, being on, like I said, time and materials instead of being based on service-linked materials and equipments and, hourly,
Gotcha.
hour labor.
Similar question as before. For people who get through and set up client-specific pricing, what are their typical reactions once they get going?
Client-specific pricing, I actually haven't set up a whole lot of those because very often when I get in a company, they already set it up. But customer-specific pricing, I've been to some that were commercial. They already had it set up and they love it. I mean, it's just, again, it's a question that you don't want to have to generate your prices by hand. In this case, all you're going to do is update your costs. And once you add it to an invoice, and again, the rule follows the same thing as dynamic pricing. Once it's added to an invoice, if you change your cost, it's not going to update it automatically. And again, too, you can set up a material if you want to be static priced. In other words, that even if you charge for it, that it's going to charge a specific amount regardless of your cost. That is something you can definitely do. But otherwise, yes, it generates the price differently, but in the end, the options are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like the benefits are pretty similar too. Like automate a lot of these commercial rates, save time managing the price book and updating it, and just really at the end of the day protecting your margins to ensure that every price is correct at every job. Are there any gotchas or watch out for, or like people you've seen mess this up really bad that we can learn from?
The only gotchas I would say is if you use a hybrid approach, like if you use both, make sure that you have both CSP categories and dynamic pricing categories well segmented out, and that you have your filter set properly. Like some might say residential or commercial. Like you could set, for example, your CSP to just act on commercial clients or your customer or residential clients. You just have to make sure your settings are well toned in and make sure that you do some tests on Next or on the practice environment. And if everything is fine, then just replicate it over to your live account.
Makes sense. Do most of the customers you work with do both CSP and dynamic pricing, or do they usually just start with one?
They usually do one,
Okay, yeah. So start with
but
one.
I do have some that do both.
Yeah, it seems like there's lots of customers who do a little mix of both, maybe light commercial and mostly residential. And so it seems like most people can do both, but it sounds like there's some nuance to it. How do they make sure those settings are correct and there's not too much like overlap or mix up?
That's going to be in the settings, and usually, very often, they're going to find those mistakes on the field. In other words, by actually live testing.
Yeah.
But either the technicians are going to find it out and they're going to report it, or it's going to be like submitted over to the office team by, calling the boss and saying, "Hey, something's wrong with that price." That's usually how they find the mistakes, because very often I've seen some people with like 20, 30,000 price book tasks. You can't just look at it all. It's impossible.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
So you can try your best in the practice and next environment, maybe with like your most common items, and then we'll catch the edge cases later.
oh yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for diving into dynamic pricing in such detail and CSP as well. I know Titan Wizards is really exciting and the work that you guys do. And I know you're an expert in particular with price book inventory. Any parting words about Titan Wizards and how you guys help?
Yeah, of course. Titan Wizards is a ServiceTitan certified provider that we focus on having a bit of a boutique experience here, where we're here for you. We're not trying to get you out the door as soon as possible. We're trying to get your problems fixed, and we have no contracts, no fluff, nothing like that. We do work on a monthly subscription that you tell us what your pain points are. If you want to stop after that, no problem. We'll be happy to do what you ask and then go. If you want us to just help you get the most out of the platform, get some things dialed in, we can definitely do that for you. But yeah, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. We're a bunch of nerds, ServiceTitan nerds that work for this company. We have very high integrity for what we do. We always try to make everybody happy, and we're trying to get you the most of it so you can get as much money out of it as possible.
Yeah, you have a Ferrari. Might as well learn how to drive
There
it.
you go.
And I know you've got Zach Kays on your team. He was on this podcast as well, diving really deep into memberships. I know that's like one of his areas of expertise, and several others on the team. Are there specific challenges and problems that you guys are like extra specially like good at that you take pride in?
We now have a bit of a department inside our company now for dealing with price books, because we noticed that a lot of our people getting in, ironically, and the Titan Wizards have a bad price book or a price book that needs work. I'm not even kidding. We actually went to Pantheon last month, and when we went to Pantheon, we had one of my coworkers that was dealing with a company that was going live with ServiceTitan had essentially no installed price book at all. I was like, all right, I'm going to go to my hotel room and we're going to knock this one out. And we did.
Wow.
So yeah, it took me about 3 to 4 hours getting a whole, I don't remember which vendor it was, but we got that whole price book done. That's it.
Wow, amazing. So price book is definitely a big area of expertise and specialty. Any other common challenges that you guys like to address?
We have various levels as far as billing goes. So in other words, each level deals with its own capability. Of course, they're cumulative. For example, level 2 will have everything in level 1 and so on and so forth. But for example, I have personally a couple of customers that are on level 3 that want to have integrations, that want to have custom cards in their Google Chat or Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever, or automations or everything like that, or reporting or anything like that. We have customers that go from like very, very basic, very small business to like, those big companies that buy other ones.
Like private equity.
Yeah, private equities. Yeah, there you go. So we have all types of customers.
Okay, awesome. And then where can people go to learn more?
You can go look at titanwizards.com, and you're going to essentially have a form there to fill if you want to schedule an appointment.
Perfect. So yeah, if what you listened to today was like, okay, you know what? We definitely need to tackle this. I know my price book is a mess. Definitely check out Titan Wizards, and Steve or someone on the team will reach out to you, and you'll be in great hands. So Steve, thank you so much for not only being the very first guest on Master ServiceTitan, but also coming back and just being so generous with your time and your wisdom.